She died last night. The woman nobody understood. The one who came. Every single Tuesday. Dr. Rebecca Hayes stared at the phone, her hands trembling slightly. The news hit differently. This wasn't just another patient. For 8 months, Vivian Hartwell had been the clinic's biggest mystery. A 54-year-old woman with Silver Streak brown hair, always wearing that same faded blue cardigan and worn leather purse clutched tight to her chest. She'd arrived precisely at 2:15 p.m., complaining of headaches that seemed to vanish the moment she sat down, stomach pains that disappeared during examination, chest tightness that never showed on any test. Rebecca had run every scan imaginable. Blood work, x-rays, EKGs, MRIs, all came back normal. Perfectly, frustratingly normal. Yet Vivian kept coming week after week with that same desperate look in her hazel eyes, like she was searching for something that had nothing to do with medicine. Now, at 35, Rebecca thought she'd seen everything in her decade of practice. But Vivian Hartwell had puzzled her like no other patient. The woman would sit on the examination table, her weathered hands folded in her lap, and describe symptoms that sounded rehearsed, almost like she'd memorized them from a medical website. Dr. Hayes, the clinic's head nurse, Jennifer Walsh, knocked softly on the office door. At 34, Jennifer had worked alongside Rebecca for 3 years, and her usually cheerful demeanor seemed subdued today. Her scrubs were a soft pink, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. "I heard about Mrs. Hartwell. I'm so sorry." Rebecca set down the phone and looked up. "Jennifer, I need to ask you something. In all those months Vivian came here, did anything seem off to you? Beyond the obvious." Jennifer stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. "Actually, yes. She always asked about you specifically. Not just any doctor. You." And she'd linger in the waiting room afterward, like she didn't want to leave. Linger how? She pretended to read magazines. But I caught her watching the other patients, especially the families. The way parents held their children. How adult kids helped their elderly parents. She'd get this look. Jennifer paused, searching for the right words, like she was memorizing something precious. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. Did she ever mention family? Never. Not once. Which was strange, because most patients talk about someone, spouse, kids, siblings. But Mrs. Hartwell? It was like she existed in a vacuum. The mystery deepened when Rebecca decided to visit Vivian's apartment that evening. She'd gotten the address from the patient files, knowing it might be crossing professional boundaries, but something inside her demanded answers. The building was an old brick structure on Elm Ridge Avenue, the kind of place where working-class families had lived for generations. The landlord, a heavy-set man named Tom Bradley, who looked to be in his early 40s, met her at the front door. His flannel shirt was stained with paint, and he wiped his hands on a rag as he spoke. "Terrible thing," Tom said, shaking his head. "Vivian was quiet, paid her rent on time, never caused trouble. Found her this morning when I went to fix the heating unit. Heart attack, they said. Can I see the apartment?" Rebecca asked. "I was her doctor. There might be medical information that could help us understand what happened." Tom hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, Doc. Though I gotta warn you, it's pretty sparse up there." The apartment was on the 3rd floor, a modest one-bedroom with hardwood floors that creaked under their feet. But Tom was wrong about it being sparse. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, all carefully arranged and framed. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Every single photograph was of her, not creepy stalker photos, but pictures clearly taken from a distance over many years. Rebecca graduating medical school, started her residency, her first day at the clinic. Some were newspaper clippings from when she'd volunteered at the free health fair downtown. Others seemed to be taken from across streets or through windows. Rebecca walking to work, leaving the grocery store, sitting in her car. "Jesus," Tom whispered. "I had no idea. Should I call the police?" But Rebecca was transfixed by something else. In the corner of the living room sat an old wooden chest, its brass hinges tarnished with age. On top of it was a single envelope addressed in shaky handwriting. "For Dr. Rebecca Hayes." With trembling fingers, Rebecca opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written in the same unsteady script. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've discovered my secret. I pray you won't think too harshly of an old woman who spent the last year of her life trying to find the courage to speak 3 words. I'm your grandmother. Rebecca's knees nearly gave out. Tom steadied her, his eyes wide with shock. Your mother, Linda, was my daughter. The daughter I gave up for adoption when I was 16 years old. I never stopped thinking about her, never stopped wondering if she was happy, if she was loved. When I found out she died in that car accident when you were 7, it nearly broke me. The letter went on to explain how Vivian had been searching for Rebecca for years, how she'd finally tracked her down through newspaper articles about her medical practice, how she'd been too afraid to approach directly, terrified that Rebecca would reject her or think she was some kind of fraud. I came to your clinic every week because it was the only way I could be near you, the only way I could see your kindness, your dedication to helping people. I watched you treat every patient with such care, such gentleness, and I was so proud, so incredibly proud. I invented those symptoms because I was lonely, Rebecca, not just lonely for company, but lonely for family, for connection, for someone who shared my blood, my history. I know it was wrong to waste your time and the clinic's resources, but those Tuesday appointments became the highlight of my week. They were the only time I felt like I belonged somewhere. Rebecca was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Tom stood awkwardly beside her, not knowing what to do with his hands. In the wooden chest, you'll find everything I've saved over the years. Pictures of your mother as a baby, as a child. The only things I had left of her. And now they're yours, along with all my love and a lifetime of pride in the incredible woman you've become. I'm sorry I was such a coward. I'm sorry I never found the strength to tell you the truth. But please know that every Tuesday, sitting in that examination room, listening to you ask about my symptoms with such genuine concern, those were the happiest moments of my life. All my love, your grandmother, Vivian Hartwell. P.S. I've left everything to you in my will. It's not much, but it includes a small savings account. I always hope that someday I might be able to help you in some way. Consider it a grandmother's gift, 27 years too late. Rebecca opened the wooden chest with shaking hands. Inside were photo albums, baby clothes that had once belonged to her mother, a birth certificate, and hospital bracelets from when Linda was born. There were letters that Vivian had written to her daughter over the years but never sent, filled with love and regret and hope for reunion. At the bottom of the chest was a small jewelry box. Inside was a delicate silver locket. Rebecca opened it to find 2 pictures, a young woman who looked strikingly like Rebecca herself, and a baby with the same hazel eyes. That's you, Tom said softly. The baby, she must have somehow gotten that picture. Rebecca later learned that Vivian had hired a private investigator years ago, not to intrude on Rebecca's life, but simply to know that she was safe and happy. The investigator had provided updates and occasional photographs, which explained how Vivian had managed to follow Rebecca's career from a distance. The funeral was small. Rebecca arranged everything, and to her surprise, several people from the neighborhood showed up. They spoke of Vivian as a quiet woman who'd helped elderly neighbors with groceries, who'd fed stray cats, who'd always had a kind word for the children who played outside her apartment building. She never talked much about herself, said Mrs. Rodriguez, an older woman who lived in the apartment below Vivian's. But she was always asking about other people's families. She loved hearing about grandchildren and family gatherings. I always thought it was sad that she seemed so alone. Standing at the graveside, Rebecca realized she wasn't alone anymore either. She had Jennifer, who'd become like a sister to her over the years. She had her colleagues at the clinic, who'd rallied around her during this difficult time. She had an entire community of patients who trusted and respected her. But most importantly, she now had a history, a connection to people who'd loved her before she was even born. In her purse, she carried the silver locket, and inside her heart, she carried the knowledge that for 8 months, she'd been treating her own grandmother with the same care and compassion she showed every patient. The irony wasn't lost on her. Vivian had been searching for something that was right there all along: love, connection, family, and Rebecca had been providing it without even knowing it. 6 months later, Rebecca made changes to the clinic's protocol. She instituted longer appointment times and encouraged staff to spend extra moments with patients who seemed lonely or isolated. She started a small support group for people without family connections, people who might be inventing reasons to visit the doctor just for human contact. On Tuesdays at 2:15 p.m., Rebecca would sometimes pause in her work and think about Vivian, about the courage it took to show up every week, even with fake symptoms, about the love that drove a grandmother to spend her final months just being in the same room as her granddaughter. And she realized that Vivian's weekly visits hadn't been about fake symptoms at all. They'd been about the most real thing in the world: the human need to be seen, to be cared for, to belong to someone. In a way, Vivian had been the most honest patient Rebecca had ever treated. She'd come to the clinic with the one ailment no medical test could detect and no prescription could cure: a broken heart that had been mending itself, one Tuesday appointment at a time. Through the simple act of receiving kindness from a granddaughter she'd never been able to claim. The last entry in Vivian's diary, which Rebecca found tucked between the photo albums, read simply, "Today Rebecca smiled at me when I left." Not her professional smile, but a real one. "I think she's beginning to suspect that I'm not really sick. But maybe that's okay. Maybe being seen, truly seen, is its own kind of healing." Rebecca kept the diary, along with everything else Vivian had left her, because sometimes the greatest kindness isn't the grand gesture or the dramatic save. Sometimes it's just showing up week after week and treating someone with dignity and care, even when you don't understand why they need it, even when you don't know their family.